My name is Will Norton, and my topic for my final project in AP European History is the fall of the Berlin Wall. I will be exploring whether or not the fall of the wall marked the end of history, as some historians say. First off, I'd like to give some background information about the wall. Following World War II, the Big Three, Roosevelt of the United States, Churchill of Great Britain, and Stalin of the Soviet Union, met at Yalta to decide the fate of post-war Germany. They decided that Germany would be split into two countries, East Germany, controlled by the Soviets, and West Germany, controlled by the Western Allied powers. The city of Berlin, although entirely contained in East Germany, was split into East Berlin, controlled by the Soviets, and West Berlin, controlled by the Western nations. Berlin was entirely inside of East Germany, a communist nation, so the western portion of Berlin, the capitalistic western portion, was trapped within a communist nation, prompting Soviet leader Khrushchev to refer to it as a bone in the Soviets' throat. The division of Germany was originally designed to make the rebuilding of Germany easier, but it eventually evolved into an ideological battle. The Soviet Union, a communist nation, began to implement the communist policies in East Germany, causing the standard of living to plummet far below West German standards. The Western nations, on the other hand, implemented capitalistic policies in West Germany, causing the economy to boom and the standard of living to skyrocket. Masses of East Germans began to relocate to West Germany because of job availability and just the overall higher standard of living. The graph shown now does not specifically show the income growth for the city of Berlin, but it does show the income growth for the Soviets during the period of their early communist days towards their late communist days. And you can definitely see a negative trend in the overall income growth. And the overall income growth decline under Soviet communist policies in Russia would be similar to the decline of income growth and thus the standard of living in East Berlin as well. The communist officials saw the mass exodus to West Germany as damaging to communism's reputation, as the citizens were fleeing communism in favor of Western capitalism by moving to West Germany. So basically, they wanted to stop the flow of ideas and the flow of actual people to West Germany to preserve their reputation in the international stage. Eager to save communism's reputation, East German officials ordered that immediate measures be taken to tighten border security. At midnight on April 12, 1961, East German soldiers built a makeshift barricade separating East Germany and West Berlin. The barricade not only divided the city, it closed off West Berlin from East Germany on all sides. So it basically enclosed the entire western portion of Berlin because it was isolated in an entire communist nation. When the Berliners awoke, they were surprised to see a physical barrier separating their city. The side they laid their head on that fateful night was a side they would live on for decades. A few days later, a block wall was built as a more permanent barrier. Again, in 1965, the wall was updated. This time, it was consisting of a concrete wall supported by steel girders. Finally, in 1980, the wall reached its final form. 12-foot-high concrete slabs, reinforced with steel, and equipped with a smooth pipe along the top to prevent scaling. On the East German side, 300 feet of sand separated the city and the wall, complete with machine guns, attack dogs, watchtowers, barbed wire, searchlights, and minefields. This area was called No Man's Land. Checkpoints were constructed to allow officials and those with special, rare privileges to cross. Checkpoint Charlie became the most famous, as it was the main checkpoint used by Western Allied forces. Although it was difficult and extremely dangerous, some East Germans attempted to flee communism and cross the wall. Of the many that tried over its 28 years standing, it is estimated that only 5,000 people were successful. Hundreds died pursuing basic human rights and freedom from the totalitarian Soviet regime. As communism declined in Eastern Europe, East German officials, desperate to maintain stability, opened the borders and symbolically ended the wall. Although it wasn't torn down yet, the borders were open. Germans of both sides cautiously approached the gate on November 9th, unsure if they should trust the East German soldiers. Finally, as Germans began to cross, the reality of the end of the wall was solidified. Cheering, hugging, kissing, and crying accompanied the wall's end. Some historians call the celebration in the streets of Berlin following the end of the wall, they refer to it as the largest block party in the history of the world. Many Germans began to dismantle the wall with pickaxes, hammers, jackhammers, any tools available. They were chipping away at the Berlin Wall, what had been, for so long, a symbol of repression, suffering, totalitarianism, and for some, death. Now that some background information has been given about the wall, I'd like to answer my topic question. Did the fall of the Berlin Wall mark the end of history? Many historians believe that the fall of the Berlin Wall was basically the fall of communism in the Soviet Union, since it marked the ultimate decline of communism in Europe. 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union would officially collapse. Francis Fukuyama promotes the idea in his book, The End of History and the Last Man. In his book, he writes, "What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of a history as such, that is, the endpoint of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government." Mr. Fukuyama was able to join us for an interview. Mr. Fukuyama, how are you doing? I'm doing well, how are you? I'm also doing well. So, Mr. Fukuyama, you say the fall of the Berlin Wall marks, and the end of the Cold War marks the end of history as we know it. So I'd like you to elaborate on that point. Of course. So, the end of the Berlin Wall marked the decline, the ultimate decline of communism, and the victory of Western liberal democracy. I believe that the victory of Western democracy in this setting shows that it is the final and most perfect form of human government, that no further evolution of our governments can occur. I believe that the Western liberal democracy is the best government we're going to get, and it's not going to get any better, and nothing that will happen after the fall of the wall, or nothing that has happened after, is history because it has seen no change. History is made because of changes. So if we do not see change and it stays the same, no history is really being made. So that's why I believe that the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union marks the end of history. Thank you, Mr. Fukuyama. Oh, no problem. Personally, I believe that this claim is very wrong. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War did not mark the end of history. Thomas Hobbes, in his Leviathan, writes that government is necessary because all men are inherently evil and need to be controlled to avoid a war of all against all. Thomas Paine, in his pamphlet Common Sense, writes, "Government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state, an intolerable one. Were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver, but that not being the case." Both men in their works argue that government is a necessary evil because man is not perfect. Essentially, calling the Western democracy the form of final government is branding it as the perfect form of government. Governments are made of man and made for men, meaning a perfect government would require perfect citizens. Man is not perfect. Governments are still necessary evils tasked with preserving peace and protecting its citizens. We cannot have a perfect government because man is not yet perfect. It's still evolving. History is still happening. As we as humans evolve, nearing our final perfect form, we are making history. The end of history will only come when man reaches perfection, no longer needing government to maintain peace and establish laws. Until our day of perfection, or until the fateful day of Earth's final breath, we fight on, weaving the threads of the present with the knowledge of the past, creating the masterpiece of our future, the image of our sons, what will one day be known as history.